I'm Kate Copsey. Welcome to Homegrown Cuisine. I'm Kate Copsey. Welcome to Homegrown Cuisine. This morning we are going to be in the garden and we're going to be looking at some things you can do to get rhubarb growing a little quicker. We're going to be looking at some potatoes and maybe planting some peas, though it's still quite early. And then we're going to find some things to take into the kitchen where Chef Amy Fothergill, a gluten-free chef, she has a book, The Warm Kitchen, and she's going to help us with some recipes. So come on, let's go see what we can find in the garden. Welcome to my little kale patch. These little guys got a little bit frosty, but that just shows you how things can go early in the season. But again, to get that succession planting, when I put these seedlings in about a week ago, I also put some seeds down. And that makes, again, is that succession planting. I also put in some little chards down here, which will mature in about a few days. And one of the things, I've got a carrot pack here, and one of the things that you can find out on the packet when you buy some vegetable, this one says a cool season, which means early season, 70 to 75 days. So from the time you put those into the ground, it'll be about 2 months, 2.5 months before they're mature. And then on the back it also says the days to emerge, which means how long it's going to take them to come out of the ground. And so it will take 10 to 25 days for these to germinate and come up above the ground. And that is testament to, really, it's reflective of the cool spring that you might get, or maybe, you know, we get 70-degree days, we get 40-degree days. And this type of thing is going to affect how warm the soil is and how quickly they're going to emerge. It tells you to sow it 1/4 inch deep. This is a really teeny tiny seed. If you're going to do rows of it, it tells you how far apart. It says 6-inch spacings. It tells you how tall they are when they're going to be thin, because sometimes when you're spreading tiny seeds, you end up getting little clumps together. So it tells you when to do that. It also tells you when to sow outside, and this one says 2 to 4 weeks before your average last frost, which for me is probably about now. We've got a couple more weeks maybe before it'll be a little bit too late. But these are great to put into, and this is a red carrot. This is going to be fun on a dinner plate. And talking of dinner, I believe Amy is cooking up something with kale and cannellini beans. So I believe she might be ready for us. So maybe we'll go inside and see how she's doing. Well, welcome. We're now in the kitchen with this kale that we picked outside, and we're with great chef Amy Fothergill, who's got a wonderful book called The Warm Kitchen, but she is also not just a family cook, but you're a professional chef. And so she's going to talk about some of the techniques of all these cold weather vegetables. We're using kale, but they can also, these things can also be used with chards and spinach and things like that, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Kate, for having me. I'm so excited. And today we're going to make a dish with kale and beans and pasta. It's really yummy, and I even have pictures in my cookbook of my kids eating it. So I have proof that they've been eating kale. And
it's so healthy for you too.
It is very healthy. So I want to talk about, you know, the reason why I'm doing this. My daughter, 8 years ago, had to go gluten-free, and we had to put her on a gluten-free diet. And back then there was nothing. So as a chef, I had to figure out how to cook gluten-free.
Which is not easy.
Which is not easy when that's all I knew how to do. So that's how I got started. And then since then, then we realized all of us in our family have to be gluten-free. So that's why I wrote the Warm Kitchen. So let's go ahead and get started with this kale, because I have to admit that when I was young, I never ate kale, and I live in California now, and now I love kale. So it is something that might seem intimidating, but it's super easy to
And it grows
cook.
so well, and
It
it's one
does.
of the earliest ones in the garden, even in these cold climates. Kale can withstand frost, and even down to about 28 degrees out there. I had some little seedlings that got caught, and they were frozen, but then they just bounced back, and we'll see those in the garden. So yes, it's I mean, kale is such a wonderful vegetable and so healthy. So what do we do with it? I mean, here's kale.
Yeah, well, I like to season it and have some other ingredients. I usually add onions and garlic and the beans. So let's start by sauteing the onions. And the first thing you want to do is have your pan hot. And you could either put your hand over it or take a little bit of water and see if it dances. It dances, yes. So once the pan is hot, then you're going to add your oil. And in the book, I have all the recipe and the amounts, but this is how I really cook at home. As I say, 1, maybe 2 teaspoons. And then I have my onion already chopped. I'm going to put that in.
And this is a full onion or half an onion, or can you just as much as you like?
Half an onion. And that's what you want to hear. That's so important, to hear the sizzle. So we're going to let that start cooking. And we just want to get it a little translucent and slightly brown. And the couple other things that I do, I'm going to add my pepper now. Just a little. And I'm going to actually wait to add the onion. Oh, sorry, not the onion, the salt. If you add the salt right now, it'll start to extract the moisture from the vegetable, and then you'll get more of a steaming or more of a sweat. And we want to saute, we want it to get brown. So don't add the salt right away. And what else do you see that I have? This, I teach cooking classes, and people ask me this all. There are 2 things they ask me: why don't you have the garlic, and why aren't you stirring? Again, the stirring, you want to let that cook. It will not extract as much moisture, and it'll get nice and brown. And garlic, if you add that now, might burn.
Yeah.
So I always wait till the end. So while this is cooking, let's talk about the kale.
Okay. A typical kale with a midrib.
Yes, and which is very hard and not easy to chew. So the first thing we want to do is and we'll both show you, you don't have to be a chef to know how to do this. We're just going to pull the leaves off of the stem, like so. And pull that, and then once they're pulled, and this can just go in your compost, in your garbage if you don't have compost. I try to compost at home.
Everybody should have a compost, yes.
And you want to have little pieces that are bite-sized. Now you could cut this with a knife, but you really don't have to. Go ahead and put that in that bowl. And what I've done is, when the kale comes from the garden, it's typically very dirty, right? And I have to say, I do not have a very green thumb, so I'm so appreciative of people like Kate who can teach us how to garden. I'm really not. I'm much better once it comes back into the kitchen.
Okay.
But
you keep it in the water right up until the end.
Yeah.
Right? So why is that?
Well, when what happens is with your kale, there might be some dirt, and dirt is heavier than water, so the dirt sinks to the bottom. And that way, if it's sinking to the bottom, it's in your bowl and not in your dish. Okay. And what we'll do is when we're ready, we're going to take the kale and just scoop it and put it on top, because if you were to drain into a colander, some of that dirt might get in there as well. Okay. So I just lower that a tiny bit. And the other thing is, we were talking about the kale being dirty. So if it's coming from your garden, you probably really want to rinse it a few times and then do the chopping. And again, this kale is very, you just pull the leaves off. The dino kale, you pull the leaves off. With chard, you can leave the stem on. It's very soft. It's almost like celery. And that one you do. And I actually did, the way I figured that out, my daughter and I were cooking, and I was taking it off, and she said, "Mama, can I taste that?" And I looked at her, it was red, chard, and she tried it, and she said, "It tastes good." And I thought, oh, that's one less thing, so now I chop it up.
Well, so certainly when you've got the small chard, I mean, those little stems are beautifully coloured.
They're very,
when they get a little bigger, you'll find that they take a lot longer to cook. So what most people seem to do is take the leaves off. Right. And then cook the stems first and then add the leaves, because that way you've got it all the same moistness. So yeah, but yeah, chard is, I mean, there are so many colourful chards. I mean, there's a rainbow chard that's got yellow and red and green in there,
Yes,
white.
white.
So lovely colours.
Okay, so the onions, if you can see, are now brown, and we just want them to be sauteed. They don't have to, slightly translucent. So we are ready now for our garlic. And again, remember, you don't want to put the garlic in too soon or it will burn. And I'm going to show you a little trick, which I'm very good with, the little tips and tricks. I'm going to put that in here, and you hear the sizzling. And again, no burning, no burning. So now I'm going to put a little bit of salt, sorry. We can always add salt later, and we're going to stir it. And do you know what happens when I add the salt? But remember what I said earlier, it's a quiz time.
Dehydrates.
So it pulls out the water, so then we'll have less burning, which really makes it make it tasty. All right, this is ready to go. What that means is the kale, if you would bring that close to me and have that right there, and watch if you just kind of have it here, and then we're going to put it right into the pan. Oh, I love that sizzle. I love how food talks to you. And we're going to go ahead and it's okay if there's some water, and you'll probably see, you can see some dirt in the bottom there. And we're going to saute this up. And you don't really have to do much right now. You just can either move it around a little bit so that the kale gets on the bottom. You could also put a cover on here if you wanted to cook it quicker, but what would happen if you put a cover on? You'll get a lot of moisture, so you have to be careful with that. And I'm just going to raise the heat a tiny bit. And while this is cooking, let's talk about the beans, because we are going to add some beans to this.
Okay, so these are white beans.
These are white cannellini beans, and these are dried. Now, if you wanted to use them for this dish, and now would not be the time to do this because it's dried. So what you would do is soak these overnight in some water, and then cook them, drain them, and rinse them, put some more water, and cook them for about an hour. And then they would look something like this, which we just took from a can, which is fine.
Which is fine, yeah.
And from the can, we rinse them and drain them. And once the kale is cooked a little bit more, we are going to add that along with our gluten-free pasta. So let's give the kale a stir, and let's let that cook. And then
and the beans, of course, that you said, they're dried. Well, those are great for growing in the garden. Everybody does, in the summer, green beans to eat when they're fresh. But if you get the cannellini beans and the kidney beans, they grow exactly the same. But you leave them until that little pod gets really dry, and you can rattle it, and the beans come out. And then you just store them dried until, as you say, the night before you want to use them. That's when you soak them so that you can have them in a recipe.
All right, so with the kale, most people eat it about this. You could cook it a little bit more, but this is perfect.
And it's so colorful.
Oh,
Isn't that beautiful color?
So let's start by adding the beans, because we want to get those up to temp. So remember that can of cannellini beans, and we are going to stir this again. And the garlic, if you were in here, it smells so good in here. Oh my gosh, the garlic. My brother-in-law loves garlic and oil. Can get him to do anything if I saute garlic and oil. So let's talk about, we're going to let that cook for just to heat up for a moment and give us a minute to talk about gluten-free pasta, because Kate and I are both gluten-free, and it's a necessary thing, and we're not doing it to be trendy. And we are, this is how we eat.
But a lot of pasta just tastes like.
It doesn't taste good.
It just doesn't taste good.
It doesn't taste good.
This is one of the better ones.
Yes, however, there is a lot of technique that I found. So I will tell you, I'm Italian, grew up in New York. Pasta was my life, so going gluten-free was a big change. However, if you cook gluten-free pasta like an Italian, it's going to come out great. So you want a big pot of water. It should be boiling. You're going to throw in a good amount of salt. The Italians say it should taste like the sea. I'm not talking a pinch. I'm talking a teaspoon or two. Put the pasta in. Give it a stir and let it simmer, rolling boil for about 8 to 10 minutes, depending upon what pasta it is. Once it is done, so we already pre-cooked ours, strain it, and then put cold water on it to stop the cooking until you're ready to use it. So now we have our cooked pasta, which is perfect al dente, and we have our beans, which look lovely and warm, and our kale, which is going to add the pasta. This really, the first time I made this for my kids, I just could not believe they were eating it. And I thought, why not just try it? And they actually enjoyed it. Of course, it's even better with a little olive oil, and if you can eat cheese, some Parmesan cheese on top. And you always want to adjust for salt, because we may not have put enough salt in the beginning. And that looks really, really nice.
And that's all it is.
And that's all it is. So I'm going to shut the heat off, and what that'll do is the pasta will keep cooking. And I'm going to take a tiny bit more olive oil, and again, the Italian way, and do that. And just a little more salt. And if we had some cheese, we could just grate some cheese. And voila, it's done.
Wow. And that took just a few minutes. Really, the kale was the longest part.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how kale, it keeps its colour, but it melts down so much, and it's just wonderful.
Oh, this looks great.
It does, and it smells
Kate,
wonderful.
I think we're going to need to have to taste this. This is one part of my job I really like. Oh, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Oh my gosh.
That is good.
All right.
And I guess now I'm going to go out and get some rhubarb for the rhubarb crisp that we're going to make for the dessert. That should be great fun. So here we are at the rhubarb patch. And one of the things I like to do with rhubarb is cover them early in the season, because these are one of the earliest fruits that you can get in the season. And so what I did this year, when they were just peeping through, I covered them with this terracotta pot and put a top on it so that it could vent and get water when it needed. Then I found one of these in the closet. This is called a wall of water. The idea is that you fill all these little tubes with water, and they absorb the sunlight during the day and the heat and retain it overnight. And that made a phenomenal difference to the growth of the plants early in the year. And so we're going to harvest just a little of the rhubarb. I'd say they are so easy to grow. What you want to do is take one of the longer stems, about 6 to 8 inches probably. You don't need a knife. You pull from the base and it just pulls out, and that was where it was attached to the base. That is how easy it is to harvest rhubarb. But one of the things about these young plants, you can't really take too much each year, and that's the same with a lot of perennials. The asparagus does the same thing. You want to let it get a little bit of a root established before you really take too much. But we've got 2 plants here. We've got more than enough to have I believe we're doing a rhubarb crisp, which is one of Amy's recipes. So we're going to finish picking this rhubarb, and then we're going to move on to do maybe a few peas and prepping some potatoes for another day.
Yes! The authentic recipes for all of our products are signature to La Morena. The chilies are literally hand-picked for each can. Everything is manufactured in Mexico and imported into the US. La Morena is best known for its quality and authentic flavor, giving our users a taste of home. Stock up on flavor with La Morena.
So this is the rhubarb that we picked, and I want to just show you, it has to be fairly long, and you get this little bit at the end there. That's the bit that you take off. Do not eat the leaves. Okay. The leaves are poisonous, and you want to have anywhere from 6 to 8 inches up to whatever on the length of this, and then we chopped it in little pieces, and because of its acridity, you put just a little bit of baking soda with it, and then you build it. It's great.
Just a little simmer, just a little simmer.
Yes, and just simmer it a little bit, chop it into little. Of course, when we were kids, we used to take a little saucer of sugar, cut the end off, dip it in the sugar, eat
so you
it
can eat
straight
it raw.
up.
Oh,
absolutely, you can eat it raw.
All right.
Yeah. So anyway, what are we going to do with this? This is another recipe from your book.
This is another one of my favorites. It is called a fruit crisp. And what I like about this recipe is you can use any fruit. So you can use rhubarb. Today we're going to use blueberries and apples, and they're green apples. So it's a little more of a tart flavor, so we'll be adding a little extra sugar. And one thing is that you can use whatever you have on hand. And if you have some berries or maybe some fruit left over from last year that are in the freezer, it's okay to add that as well.
Okay.
And what I like about it as well, it's simple to put together. It's ingredients most people have on hand. And in 35 to 40 minutes, you'll have a wonderful dessert.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, I think we should start with the topping.
Okay.
And what I'm going to do is have Kate, I'll have you add the ingredients. Let's start with the gluten-free flour.
Okay.
In this mix we have brown rice flour, some potato starch and tapioca starch. In my cookbook I use a blend that's similar to that. Some of the blends
This is a commercial one. And of course when you use your mix, you've got all the different flours integrated in it. I sometimes find that it's a little quicker sometimes to go and pick up a ready-made one. But one of the things I would really like to mention, you see here, you've got, this one is packed in a certified gluten-free facility, so there is no cross-contamination. And actually this one has many of the things that you have in yours, which makes it an acceptable substitute if you're in an emergency, I think.
Oh, it's not a problem at all. And one thing I want to mention about this flour blend is that it doesn't have any xanthan gum. So xanthan gum is used to bind things together, and I often...
And to help raise things.
Yes, and
so the cake mixes.
Yeah, so I often use that for my breads and my pizza and my muffins, but in a crisp you don't need to use that at all, so it's very easy. And
it's just a plain flour.
Yeah, so we started with a half a cup, and next we're going to add a third of a cup of oats. And what kind of oats do we have to have, Kate?
They have to be the gluten-free variety.
And yes, a quick cooking is usually best. Very, very important. Now, if someone has celiac disease, they may not be able to even have any oats. You would just use more flour, but absolutely make sure if this is gluten-free that it's a gluten-free
Again,
oat.
it's a cross-contamination thing. Yes.
All right,
okay.
Let's add our sugar. So we're adding a little bit more today. We're doing a half a cup, and that's because the fruit we're using is a little tart. But in the recipe, I give you a range, and a lot of my recipes give you some options so that if you...
So for blueberries, for instance, which are very sweet, you'd want to use maybe less sugar.
Right, but if for this...
And to taste. Some people like things sweeter, some people don't.
Yes.
Okay.
And next is the cinnamon and sea salt. We put that together, and I just like the flavor of cinnamon. You don't have to have cinnamon, but the sea salt offers a really nice, any salt offers a nice balance in baked goods. Okay, so that's all mixed. We are going to add some chopped walnuts today. If you don't have walnuts, if you don't like walnuts, you don't need to put those in, but I like the crunch and I like the flavor of the nuts. So once that's all mixed, the next very easy step is to add some melted butter. Now in our house, go ahead and add the whole thing. So it's somewhere between 6 and 8 tablespoons. 8 tablespoons is a little bit better because it'll become tastier. And I started saying in our house, we don't eat dairy. So what we'll do is instead of the butter, we'll use vegetable oil or a melted butter substitute. And that looks great. So let's just leave that like that. Yeah. So in the second bowl, we are going to add our fruit. And I also want to mention I have the oven preheated to 375, and that's all ready to go. And I have my baking dish, and that has been greased. I just took some of the extra butter from the melted butter container and I greased that.
And that's easy to do. I prefer doing greasing to using one of the sprays because a couple of the sprays have got flour in them.
Yes.
And that's something you have to be particularly aware of.
Right. So today we just used some fruit that we had around, and we're going to start with our blueberries, and then we're going to add our cooked rhubarb that came fresh from the garden today, which is lovely. And this, of course, would probably, this crisp would be great with strawberries. Strawberry rhubarb is a very popular.
Rhubarb, yes. That'll be another week or two.
Yeah.
And strawberries, they're all already starting to put little buds on. They're going
to
be there in a week or two.
All right, we have some cut green apple. If you're cutting this ahead of time, you might want to squirt a little lemon juice on top, because otherwise the apple will start to brown. And then we'll just mix that together. And it's somewhere between 3 and 4 cups, but it really doesn't matter. And it's always good when you have a little extra crisp anyway. People always fight over that. So mix that, and then we're adding some cornstarch. If you can't have corn, you can use any starch. So you could use
potato starch
or tapioca starch. The recipe that I had originally, well, this was flour, and I switched it to cornstarch to make it gluten-free. And then again, our sugar. And you can make this a couple of times, and if you find it's too sweet or not sweet enough, all of this can be adjusted. And that's what makes it such a great recipe. And my 9-year-old can make this recipe. So that says something. But I usually help her with the oven part.
Doesn't that look good?
Yeah, it does. So the cornstarch is used as the fruit starts to extract any of the water. It'll help to thicken it so that when you're all done, you'll have a little bit of a juicy, syrupy type thing. All right. And next, we're going to switch that into the baking pan. You could put some raspberries in here, peaches, anything you have. The apple should be peeled and cored and chopped into small pieces. Right, and then
it's going to go on
so
top.
simple. Let me just flatten that out. Oh, you can leave that in there, please. Thank you. And then the crisp topping, just little bits, very easy. This is really my style, is keeping things super simple, and when it comes out of the
Little
oven,
dumplings, are we?
almost, yeah. And when it comes out of the oven or out of the pan, everything just tastes really good. And then we're gonna have a nice dessert today. And then when it comes out of the oven, you could serve it by itself or with vanilla ice cream, maybe some cream.
Oh, some cream. Yeah.
Cream. And if you're dairy free, I would use a coconut ice cream, is my favorite.
Yeah.
All right. And again, I like to say that my cooking is very technique based. So once you learn this technique of how to make a crisp, you could then use it for so many different things. So
And it's very similar to in England, and your husband is England, so I'm sure he's mentioned this. In England, they call them crumbles, which are just slightly different, but they use basically a flour and fat mix, and you just put that over the top of fruit. And so how long is this going to be in the oven for?
Okay, so we have that oven at 375, and it's about 35 to 40 minutes when the top is nice and brown and the fruit is tender.
And then I guess we'll take it out of the oven and we will taste it.
Absolutely. Okay, so the crisp has come out of the oven. It's done.
It looks and smells wonderful, Amy. Yeah,
I think we should give it a try.
I think we should.
All right.
Is it going to be too hot?
I think just go on the edges. We should be okay. Let's give it a try.
Yeah. That is great, Amy.
Oh, thank you.
I love the crisp on top, and the fruit is all mixed together. Great.
Excellent.
Well, thank you. It's been wonderful having you here, Amy. Thank you so much for the cooking and the crisp and things. And your book is The Warm Kitchen, and that's available from your webpage?
Yes, it is. My webpage is amythefamilychef.com, and on the website you can find my blog. And on the blog I have the recipe for the crisp, as well as you can find access to signing up for my newsletter, my social media channels, Facebook and Twitter and so forth. And I just want to say it's been so much fun, Kate. Thanks for having me.
And I hope we get to have you back here again, Amy. It's been a pleasure. And I hope everybody has enjoyed the show. It's been gardening and gluten-free cooking on Homegrown Cuisine.